This is a video on how to make my Amstrad control pads. So first off, we'll just go over what we have. So each control pad will have the holder if you wanted one of those. You'll have the front of the case where everything goes into. You'll have a D-pad, and then you'll also have two buttons as well. And you also have the back for the control pad, and you'll see that one side the hole is closer to the edge than the other, so you need to have the back going on the correct way, otherwise the holes won't line up. You also have the circuit board itself, the 9-pin D-sub cable, and then we have 6 of these momentary switch buttons. Then we have 4 tiny little M2 screws. So all we're going to need is a screwdriver that works with these screws, a soldering iron, and then some solder as well, which I have in abundance. Now the solder that I've got, if you're new to soldering, which some of you will be because this is a really easy board, so the solder that I've got has got flux inside it. If your solder does not have flux inside it, then I would suggest you get some flux to go as well. So I'm just going to put everything to the side just now that I am not going to be working on. So, nice clean work area. Make sure there's nothing on the board itself that's going to contaminate the solder. Doesn't matter which ones you start with, which buttons you start with. So I'm going to start with putting the buttons on. And these should push through quite easily. You'll notice that the pins are on top and bottom, so if you're trying to put it in sideways, it's not going to go because it just won't fit. So you need to just turn it round. Push them in. So I like to put them in and then push them quite firm just to make sure they are nice and flush against the board. So I'll do that with all of them. Sometimes the buttons, when you put them in, they'll want to fall off again. I wouldn't worry about that. Just push them in as well as you can. Sometimes you can bend the pins a little bit to keep them in before you solder it. Anyway, you can see here all the pins are poking through. All the buttons are nice and flat against the board. Check both down this side, down from the bottom, up from the top, just to make sure everything's nice and flush before we start soldering. And just one last final check, just push it down onto your desk to make sure all the buttons are in nicely. Now I am going to put my soldering iron on. In fact, I'm going to get my solder my extractor fan on as well. Right, so extractor fan on. I'm going to put my solder over this side. I like to make sure the solder is nice and straight. Before I start, I'm just going to check that my soldering iron is on at 360 degrees Celsius. I'm going to give my iron a little bit of a clean first. That's nice and shiny. And then I'm going to turn the iron. So there's a little bit there, so that helps transfer the heat onto the pins. And then I'm just going to start. There we are. most of them look okay. I'm just going to check the other side to make sure solder has come all the way through. There's a couple there that could do with a little bit more. Now before I start the other side, I'm just going to push the board down onto the desk again just to make sure everything's square. There you go, you can see I've actually put too much in this one. It's turned into a bit of a ball there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean my iron and then tin the iron with that ball. So it's now on my iron. Still quite a wee bit on there, still a bit too much. So I can do it again. There we go. Still a wee bit too much on there, but it's acceptable, I would say. And saying that, it's still not really come through this side. Yeah. So all I've done here is I've held up the pin on the opposite side to draw it through. Could possibly do the same here. There we go. That drew that through quite nicely. Make sure the other side's okay. Yep, that's fine. Right, so that's the buttons on. I'm going to tin this before I put it back. I'm just going to leave my soldering iron on. Right, so we're going to put the wires in there. And we're going to start with the red one. I'll put the order of the wires on the screen so you can see. And I'm going to do each one individually. The reason I'm doing each one individually is because I'll get an extraction fan on. If I tried to put all the wires in and then solder them all in the one go, I would probably be putting one in and then another one would fall out. I'm going to try and make sure these don't get twisted. Okay, there we go. That's what goes in. Now you can see there's a lot of excess wire here. I'm just going to snip them off. There we are, that's that nice and clean. Or nice and trim. So now all that's left is to start putting this into the case. Right, so we have the top part of the case. We've got 4 M2 screws, and we need our D-pad and the buttons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the buttons in. So I've got those buttons in. I'm going to need to make sure those squares are all parallel, so that when I put the board in, the inside of the buttons are going to match with the outside of the switches. And I've messed it up already. There we go. So I've got that in there, I'm just wiggling this from side to side to make sure it's definitely in there. Now if I pull it the right way around and I'm holding the board in the back with my fingers, and I can test the buttons. There we go. So now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to slot my cable in. Now, if you can see here, this cable is not going to fit, the cable relief isn't going to fit properly because it's actually hitting the top of the circuit board. So I'm going to have to trim that. So on the cable relief part, you can see there's a flat edge. So that's going to be facing the back of the controller. So it's going to be facing the top of this case. So we're going to need to cut the opposite part and that top part, and I'll show you why I do the top part in a little while as well. So let's just cut the top part, and then that way I know where to cut the opposite end. There we go. Right, so this should go in a little bit easier. So same thing again, I'm just going to have to make sure those buttons are in the correct spot. Put the circuit board in, kind of wiggle it around a little bit to make sure those buttons are all in okay. Now I've got the flat part, that cable up the top. It doesn't need to go all the way down, but now I should be able to move the circuit board so that all four holes are showing for the screws to go in. So it shouldn't move when you let go of it. Now we'll get the back of the case. Now this is the back of the case, and I don't know if you'll be able to see this properly. There we go. At the top of the back, you can see there's a little bit that's different from the bottom. Now that indent there is to match up with that bit of the cable. So if we put this in here, you can see that matches up with where the cable goes. So another way of doing this is if you've got one of them that lines up, just put it in slightly, don't tighten it all the way up. And that way, if any of the other ones are out, you should be able to just move that opposite corner. So all I'm doing is just putting my screwdriver in, and you can see there I've just moved that slightly upwards. Oh, it's not wanting to stay. And then when I've got it where I think is right, I can fire a screw in and try it out. And it looks like I've got it. Then that way, the other two should be able to go straight in. Now I'm not tightening these up completely yet, because the buttons might be slightly off. So I can still push that in. Now, if I look at the buttons there, you can see that one of them here is kind of moving off. It's at an angle, kind of, well, let me see, it's an angle that way, if you can see. So we can still jimmy the board a little bit, hopefully. Now I just used the buttons to try and move the board around. So I'm just moving that. So that moves the switch which is on the board, which kind of levels things out. You can see there, things have leveled out a little bit more. And there we go. We now have a finished controller. We can now put that into the handles, which sometimes can be a little bit of a tight fit, which is good. There we go. Now we have a nice usable Amstrad controller.